But next up, we have the readings on dance. And coming up will be Dr. Urmimala Sarkar Munsi and Anita Cherian. I'll give you a brief introduction about them. Urmimala Sarkar Munsi is a social anthropologist with a special research interest in performance and intersectionality and dance and movement therapy. She is a dancer, choreographer, trained in Kathakali, Manipuri, and Uday Shankar style of creative dance at the Uday Shankar India Cultural Center, Kolkata. Her recent books are Uday Shankar and his Transcultural Experimentations, Dancing Modernity, and Alice Boner Across Arts and Geographies. Anita Elizabeth Cherian is Associate Professor and Dean Officiating, School of Culture and Creative Expressions, Ambedkar University, New Delhi. Her areas of expertise, which are several, include postcolonial literatures and theory, performance studies, cultural studies, and cultural policy studies and dance studies. She has a PhD in performance studies from the Tisch School of the Arts, New York University. I'd like to request Urmi and Anita to come up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Marg, and thank you, IIC, for giving us this opportunity to speak about this exciting adventure that we all had together. I and Anita have been conversing since the beginning when Naman approached us. The first phase was, of course, to get 312 articles, photo essays, photo stories, and long essays. And then sieve through those 312 articles and put them in 5 bags. So the 5 bags contained, to begin with, chosen articles on 5 different topics. The first one was heritage, heredity, and the arts patronage. Second one was regional performance and living traditions. Third was presenting and representing the classical. Fourth was the guru, shishya, and the parampara. Dance, and fifth one was dancing in the contemporary times. So you can see that unlike Naman's curation, ours was not a temporally structured thing, nor a geographically structured thing. But it went along with a kind of a curriculum-related structure, which in Indian dance history would be the ideal kind of, one of the ideal kind of structures that we might follow. And then these 5 bags had to be, sieved through time and again, read time and again, and then what emerged was that Marg first volume, the blue one, which Naman had also shown, that also had a dance essay. Then all the other volumes had dance in some form or the other, either as a regional structure or as something of a national structure or a special volume on a state. So dance was everywhere in Marg and written by people who were very Orientalist, almost like, putting us off in terms of, reading through the essays, to very academic, wonderfully illustrated essays, which we could not cut and shorten for our requirements. And we started with the fact that we've been told over and over, again and again, that dance had to be danced. We have argued back. Dance is ephemeral, and therefore, all documentations make sure that dance is revisited only through writings, structured documentation, to ethnographical, critical, or analytical writings. If there is no documentation, dance does not carry on to tell us anything about it. Readings from Marg archive provides a glimpse of the wealth of documentation and discourse on dance that has been created over the last 75 years. At the outset, it is necessary to state our position as editors of a reader that makes visible the range of writings on dance and other movement-based practices. The selection of articles has not been an easy task, as we wanted to keep all the material that creates a collage of histories written both by practitioners and historians. Basing our understanding on Marg's guiding mandate to become an active part of the emerging discourse generation process around cultural heritage, history, and ever-changing artistic and aesthetic practices in the newly independent nation, we were often overwhelmed as we made our way through the stories of individuals, communities, institutions, pedagogies, and assimilations. Now I'll take you through some of the confusions that we had, and it reflects in these photographs, beautiful photographs that have been published through the years as part of stories or as photographs themselves. And then very detailed documentation of movements, both in terms of photos and in terms of sketches, and extraordinary documentation that exists within Marg. Sorry. So the volume of this, this volume of the magazine bears testament to strenuous efforts to classify the multiplicity of practices, practitioners, and productive contexts. The key anchors of or indices of this classificatory project are, I would suggest, first, temporality, which organizes movement practices under the rubrics of the traditional, classical, and ancient, the folk, primeval, or indigenous, and the modern, experimental, and contemporary. We find that attendant upon each of these are distinct frameworks of documentation and interpretation, drawing upon the disciplinary languages of nationalism, religion, and spirituality, anthropology, and progressive modernism. I would now ask Anita to take care of the presentations related to the two sections that she has taken care of, and then I'll come back with the three sections that I have curated.
Thanks, Urmi, and my thanks to the IIC, to the National Institute of Design, to Naman, to the Marg team, and of course to Urmi, who was an extraordinary companion amidst this journey. So I will be introducing two sections, heritage, heredity, and arts patronage, and presenting and representing the classical. So we are both going to be quite brief in our presentation of the volume. Okay, so I am a bit, what is the word for it? I cannot do two things, and I cannot move a PPT. So I just want to very quickly say that what we are attempting is a conceptualizing of the archive and how it can help towards a pedagogy for performance and for dance. For me, it is very important to think long-term about methodological imperatives and how archives can help take this methodological imperative in dance studies forward. So anyway, so one moment. Okay, so this this section has these essays. You'll see them, Rhythms of Dance in the Bug Caves, an image essay, Dance in Transition, The Pioneers by Mohan Khokar, Kapila Vatsyayan's essay on Uday Shankar and his associates, and Purnima Shah's essay on state support in independent India. We've had to pick up from this vast bunch of essays, 4 or 5 essays that would represent. And each section is comprised of both essays that are reproduced in full or essays where we only have the images. So let me just quickly go through the sections. So section 1, the context of decolonization in the subcontinent shaped a rhetoric of recuperation that applied across cultural and social history. We might ask how a nation emerging into a modern sovereign existence recapitulates its past in order to reimagine its present. This section is concerned with the ways in which questions of lineage, heritage, and patronage shape of movement practices. In this regard, we ask, does the ephemerality of performance affect the forms of engagement with history? And in addition, how do the Marg archives contribute with their reflections on and participation in this exercise? So this is something that is a preoccupation for me, the way in which, at a certain level, performance studies wants to kind of move away from history and history writing. And I'm constantly trying to bring us back into that. And the Marg volumes were extraordinary in being able to kind of show us through the wealth of documentation how useful these could be towards conceptualizing material. In an essay which highlights the active contestation of the antecedents and provenance of Buddhist cave architecture in Maharashtra, the art historian Yashdath Alone comments that the field and its growth operated under the shadow of the polemics of political history. It is a good idea to keep this perspective in mind when we engage with narratives that document dance. The late 1940s are a significant moment for the study of culture, not only in terms of issues of production, but also owing to the work's expressive potential. Marg's privileged position as commentator and documenter of the cultural ecosphere of this period is worth paying attention to. As evidenced by Marg, the scholarship on dance in India suggests that it is a product of discourse and is itself discursive. Assertions of national sovereignty are confidently made from within the spaces of dance. Our concern is with formal practices and with the discursive narration of their histories of institutionalization. The magazine bears testament to strenuous efforts to classify the multiplicity of practices, practitioners, and productive contexts. The key anchors or indices of this classificatory project are, I would suggest, first, temporality, which organizes movement practices under the rubrics of the traditional, the classical, the ancient, the folk, primeval, indigenous, and the modern, experimental, contemporary. Second, a sense of place, suggesting the anchoring of dance within a precisely delineated space. This might be a temple and its chief deity, a complex of caves, a school, a colliery, the cultural institutions of the state, and its spaces designated for performance. The final classification, I suggest, indexes modes of transmission and dissemination of forms from one generation to the next. Over time, colonialism, decolonization, and postcolonial nation building have disrupted and transformed earlier pedagogic methods and institutions of patronage and stewardship. Here again, Marg's contribution is invaluable. In its intermeshing of the textual with the photographic, we find an intervention that suggests how genealogies of embodied practice might be constructed from amidst the ruins of time. Owing perhaps to its primarily art historical basis, the magazine's essays write dance history through art history, material culture, and tangible heritage. And I'll move on to the next section, which is presenting and representing the classical. Marg magazine's rich and varied archive houses not only visual documentary materials that seek to transpose the energies of embodied movement onto ink and paper, they are also an invaluable resource through which critical attitudes and perspectives to and on the classical in the intervening decades might be traced. Our selection of essays and photographic materials represent in some measure the 8 designated forms of the classical: Bharatanatyam, Kathak, Manipuri, Kathakali, Kuchipudi, Odissi, Kshatriya, and Mohiniyattam. The depth of the archive made our task difficult, yet the effort has been to choose pieces which show an engagement with forms and their aspect, reveal conditions or moments of emergence into visibility, unpack the politics of the classical, direct attention to the complex relations that exist between writers and researchers, practices and practitioners, and finally foreground the intimacies of engagement between performance forms and textualities. The production of the classical is a discursive initiative. It possesses a vocabulary simultaneously descriptive and categorizing. Marg's contribution to this project is significant. The definitions and elaborations of classical dance forms undertaken at Marg were carried forward by the Sangeet Natak Academy after its establishment in 1953. In 1954, the SNA began to designate and delineate classical forms by instituting SNA awards for dance. A remarkable unanimity of opinion is evident in the work published in Marg and in those articulated in the SNA's journals and conferences. The early issues of Marg have essays which show seekers, explorers based in the urban centers of Delhi and Bombay, traveling to the peripheries, performing functions of survey and classification, looking to learn about a form and then the form itself, becoming in time its flag bearer. However, in more recent issues, such as the volumes on Kathakali, Kudiyattam, and Kshatriya, we have exponents and rasikas from within the form's ecology commenting on the aesthetic and vocabulary of classicism. Marg's essays on the classical suggest that the concept might be fundamental to the constitution of the nation-state as both an imagined and a territorial entity. For instance, in a starkly titled essay on Bharatanatyam, called Spiritual Background, Rukmini Devi Arundale claims that it was the purest form found in the Tamil regions and was practiced in accordance with the Shastras laid down by the sage Bharata. Sunil Kothare's essay, The State of Classical Dance, 2000, traces the trajectories by which forms from distant regions of the subcontinent came to be recognized and validated as a consequence of the nationalist movement. Forms that existed prior to the inception of the nation-state are renamed, reinscribed, and mapped onto the contours of the new nation. This section begins with dance historian Mohan Khokar's essay on Kuchipudi. He argues that the 3 forms from the southern peninsula, Bharatanatyam or Sadir, the Kuchipudi Bhagavatam, and the Bhagavata Mela, are linked by way of geography, ancestry, modes of institutionalization, repertoire, and technique. In a manner characteristic of endeavors undertaken in the period of high nationalism, the essay carries a documentary imperative visible in the attention paid to the garnering and assembling of detail. So while on one hand, the purpose of the exercise seems to be that of establishing distinction through formal classification, on the other, it is underwritten by the desire to show these forms as locally variant versions of the same. Driven also by the desire to document, Maya Rao's essays on the hastas in Kathak is a historiographical exercise in its attempt to unpack an embodied archive of gesture with the intention of assigning each with either Shastric or non-Shastric antecedents. In a similar vein, Vaiji Doraiswamy's description of the form Mohiniyattam is yet another space wherein similarity is seen to be more significant than difference. The writer suggests that the stability of everything four-square being firmly implanted in the classical Indian mind, like the 4 yugas, the 4 Vedas, the 4 Varnas, and the 4 ashramas, the 4 styles of dance seem to be the last word regarding their variety and scope. However, if the early essays in Marg emphasize the form's aesthetic intent to aid their project of formal classification in a newly independent nation, a question that needs to be raised concerns what happens to a ritual form when it is adopted or adapted by outsiders. Our interest in Anjana Jhaveri's essay on the Ras Leela is with the form's ritual function. What happens to this when it begins to serve as an aesthetic medium? The essay's detailing of the form as a site wherein Manipur's Vaishnava identity is reiterated might offer us a clue about this being a significant criteria for the designation of the form as classical. In her essay on Sattvika Abhinaya, Sudha Gopalakrishnan's concern is with the modalities of aesthetic communication in an intensely codified form such as Kathakali. She says that Abhinaya is the mode of aesthetic communication of an abstract idea or theme to a Sahardian, a connoisseur, thus suggesting that Abhinaya transforms the message into a communicable form. Of essence is the requirement that the message be perceptible to both the senses and the minds of the Sahardi. Extending this argument, Apukuttan Nayar's essay on Rasabhinaya highlights the form's intense self-reflexivity, shared intimately with the Sahardi, which contributes to the very specific ecology within which the form exists. The Sahardi is embedded in every part of the form's imagination of itself. One moment. And its conditions of possibility, from its operation as a medium of communication to its sculpting of a specifically evolved recipient. However, if Gopalakrishnan assigns prana as the life source of Kathakali, Nayar names Rasabhinaya as its soul. Rasa, it is emphasized, permeates every aspect of Kathakali, from its textual sources to the Artakatha and finally to the performance itself. The Marg volumes on dance perform a vital archival function. In the early editions, the task seems to have been that of reconstructing classical performance and its repertoires from its extensive collection of visual documentation of material and architectural heritage. This attention to performed detail, captured visually and in text, continues to be a feature of Marg's contributions, one that we have attempted to portray in our selection of essays. Thank you.
I will quickly take you through the next few sections. So the next section is regional performances and living traditions. The section, regional performances and living traditions, is created with the purpose of drawing attention to the categories of embodied practices such as dance, often including theatre and martial art, that remain relevant in the lives of regional communities in different parts of India. They are known to us as administrative and aesthetic categories, as tribal and folk dances, distinct from the classical arts, as local and regional practices in terms of their presence, relevance, aesthetic appreciation, and patronage. The section resists the term folk by using alternate terms of reference such as regional and living tradition that register the community involvement in dance rather than just highlighting the form as a skill. By calling the living traditions our survival forms, Mulk Raj Anand, in one of his editorials, had appealed for analytical attention to the utilitarian as well as aesthetic context of the vast variety of regional dances of India. As a follow-up to his editorials, we note the principal significance of the regional dances as creation and maintenance of community identity, building and boosting social cohesion, expression and transmission of collective philosophies, and finally marking and communicating events of social, economic, and political significance. These complexities are things to keep in mind when we go through the essays and illustrations of this section. The essays are alive with references to the functions these performing arts continue to perform in the community spaces to which they belong. These chosen essays serve as example of writings that bring into sharp focus the precarity of such embodied practices, many of which have already vanished from the everyday practices of the communities. These essays and photographs become priceless documents that keep the past alive. The section 4 is Guru, Shishya and Parampara. This section consists of collated readings referring to the Guru Shishya Parampara, a method of learning that has been active over post-colonial dance history within the Indian system of intergenerational artistic guild-like transfer of knowledge. This essay included here the essays included here represent some of the ways in which this significant system of knowledge transmission and regulation of or dissemination was written about. While working on essays for this section, we noticed that the precarity of these artistic occupations is masked by discourses on dedication and selfless love of art, with reference to cultural history and the responsibility of carrying on the parampara or traditional knowledge system, most of it invested on the guru and his way of carrying on the tradition or transmitting it. This is evident from the portrayal of the individual journeys of some well-known gurus of the past in the context of the dance history in India. The articles in this section help us identify the absence of the above discourse in detail. They do not address them, they cannot. This gap needs to be filled urgently for the positive elements of the traditional knowledge transmission system to be incorporated as an alternative system of pedagogy. Seen in this light, one must critically acknowledge the Guru Shishya Parampara as a once popular system of learning, and there were and are many experts with different levels of expertise and popularity. This is how we would like to create a historical space for some of the experts who, as gurus, established teaching systems in various forms of dance in India. The section really had different kinds of narratives. Some are just kind of a genealogy of gurus from a certain form, to some very intimate kind of description of guru's experience, and some about patrons who have made it possible for the pedagogy to survive in certain regions. We move on to the next section, Dancing in the Contemporary Times. The experiments with new dance began in the early 20th century. Though the creative experiments in dance were not claimed as modern or contemporary dance by innovators themselves, it was the open acknowledgement and assimilation of motifs of their surroundings and changing environments that made their dance experiments stand out against the classical ones. The essays in this section, chosen from published material on contemporary dance, map out the contemporary dance scenario, addressing the principal concerns of sustainability, patronage, support, and systems of learning, bringing forth voices from senior and mid-career and emerging practitioners. It generates hope and creates the groundwork for future volumes that could take the readers on a detailed journey into the emerging world of new dance, dance theater, and other embodied practices. Our edited volume comes to an end, seeing hope in the changing dance ecology that includes popular film dances as well as experimental embodied artistic practices across caste, class, gender, sexuality, body types, different dance skills, and experiments with traditional, transitional, and new techniques. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was really a lot to pack in, and I'm sorry if we are sounding a little abstract as we are going on, and we don't have time to exemplify each of our instances of what happened with Manipuri and what happened with Kathak and what happened with Sadir and what happened with, different things. So if there are questions, we tried to edit it in a way that we dealt with the variety of the traditions, but we didn't categorize it in that manner. We categorized it by the thematics that they demonstrated. The same was the case with temples, actually. I tried to cover all the different types of temples, but I didn't do it as a regional classification in the chapter plan. So the visual narrative and the textual narrative sort of balance the intentions out by covering all bases. Do we have, questions or discussion, anything that you feel that needs to come up or you're curious about?
Yeah, there's a question there.
Yeah, I wasn't quite clear about like what your intention is here. I'm not just being negative about this. You have this archive which comes from Marg, right? And you've put together these various volumes on various art forms, etc. Now, there are archives of all kinds. Marg, what you get from Marg is one archive. And we might go there and be able to access this material. What do you want these readers to do? So are we, again, are you just presenting, just certain sections of the archive to us and saying, these are the most important, whatever, articles or essays, and therefore these are the ones you should read? Are you trying to open out the Marg archive and say, hey guys, there's all this stuff here, come and explore? So what exactly? Because if we're looking at it just in terms of historiography, because you're talking about curriculum, right? So if we're looking at it as historiography, then we should be looking at it, in my humble opinion, contextually. So what is the context of when the art form was generated or created? What was the context in which these writers wrote these articles? And what is the context in which we are reading them, right? And then we begin to understand these things very differently. So I was very interested in the question that came up after your presentation, Naman, about using terms like colonialism when we're talking about Southeast Asia and the Indian connection. We were not a nation at that time. So what are we talking about, when we talk about a certain kind of colonial move? So if we read contextually, then perhaps we would complicate these relationships and start thinking about it, which is why I'm questioning. What is your intention? What is your intention here?
Do you want to go first?
Who is this a question to? Is this a question to Naman or to...
Yeah, I think partly you've answered some of your question yourself. I think that's been very helpful, and that's really, thank you. But I think also the point you're making, I think, it would be a bit presumptuous to think that the Marg archive can speak for the historiography of the subject as a whole, as it is known and understood the world over. It can't do that. Does a publisher absolve himself of the responsibility of having to position his archive in any which way? No, nor can I do that. I think there has to be a far wider discussion across, when we talk about the arts, what are we really talking about? Are we talking about writing histories and writing social sciences? Or are we talking about art practitioners, these readers aimed at people who come from practice or people who come from theory? And, the first of our conversations of this nature on assessing these readers and presenting them was done at NID last week. We had a seminar there, with the same seminar that we're having with you here today. And we did it over there very consciously first, before doing it here. In order to be able to get feedback from an institution that prides itself and says very clearly that we are here to make, to do. We are not here for theory. We are not here for history. We have embodied knowledge. We learn that through our practice, we have the history and the theories that you people are writing about embodied in our practice. We don't care for these words, right? And so it was interesting to be able to start the seminar there, because there is a definite requirement to be able to talk about this in an integrated way across these different registers and platforms and elicit this kind of feedback. Marg's is only one archive. There are many institutions that should hopefully have similar exercises and introspect, and other publishing houses that have rich archives should be able to do similar things. I think as editors, we all came with a fair amount of teaching experience in our fields to be able to come up with a response to the requirements in our disciplines that we felt we could critique the Marg archive in some way, use the Marg archive to both acknowledge what it had, and as our speakers will show and have spoken about, what it lacks. There are things that are missing that Marg didn't quite do, which are important for us now. And so for every article, we have a couple of paras that position that study from our perspective as editors now. And I think we have a section opener which talks about certain issues that are germane for our understanding in today's day and age. And to what extent the Marg archive can illuminate that, we have utilized it. But where it doesn't, I think we've also tried to call it out and say that it hasn't been able to provide that. So I think the function, the readers, really to answer your question, what function do these readings volumes serve? I think is to really be able to bring to the fore what we as teachers and pedagogues have felt are requirements for our times, and to be able to communicate with our student body, but have not always been able to find the necessary resource material as talking points and show them symptomatic studies that our students and others can look at to understand the different ways in which a subject can be studied and what can be done. So I think we've tried to do that through the publication of these readings. But
Can I?
yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to say that, each of the volumes have different reasons for being the way they are. But for us, we clearly wanted to kind of showcase readings on dance from 75 years of Marg. So we have that in our title. Secondly, what we wanted to do is that till date, when dance history is taught in most of the university spaces, it is a kind of mix and match of khichdi, if I can call it, of practice and theory, where it is not clear whether it is mythology being, grandly presented as mytho-history, or it is real history. But these essays that are chosen and put under these kinds of 5 exact categories are essays which are chosen with the view that from these there is a sense of dance history that can be put together for an undergrad course at least. And I actually am surprised, and we are all surprised, that it has turned out the way it is. If you include the introductions that that Naman is mentioning, these introductions actually give a base to how that essay has to be read, and in the local context, but also in the kind of national dance history context. So it actually is a reader which is making us also relook at dance history. Not only, we are not just imagining that people will, but we have gone through that phase, and that was our excitement about it.
Can I also respond to this? Thanks, Belinda. So I think Urmi and I spent a lot of time talking about how we should put this volume together, but we were coming from very different methodological spaces. But there is a certain way in which the volume comes together, because we discussed each, why are people calling me, each essay and why it would go in. And I think what Naman was saying and Urmi was saying about each section has a section, an essay that introduces the section and why it exists, and each essay has a contextualizing essay, a contextualizing short essay which kind of introduces the reader into how you would read this. So for instance, if you're looking at Mulk Rajanan's piece on these cave paintings, one is not looking at that essay just from the perspective of what Mulk Rajanan is saying, but also from the perspective of the kind of discursive framework from where the essay comes. So for me, a large part of this exercise was a kind of contextualizing of discourse, of setting dance in its kind of discursive frameworks. And for me, it was a kind of extraordinary exercise. And I think that also is because I'm not a dancer, just to see the visual material and to kind of, look at the visual material alongside the textual material, and to look at and understand this textual material as discursive. Now, I think one of the problems that really kind of affects performance studies, dance studies, is the sense of being authentic. In fact, we are not authentic, we are just discursive. And discourse is very much about how a period speaks. And so for me, context was, for both of us, context was absolutely fundamental. And I think it is this context that generates both choice and the articulation of how we are introducing the piece. Thanks.
Not at all, not at all. You're
not at all.
I hope we are not taking it.
I just want, for me, the clarity has to come in terms of how, in this symposium or
Yeah.
now, whatever, how does the word curriculum come in? How
Yes.
are we talking about curriculum with these presentations?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, that's exactly, I think each of us have dealt, and also there are certain issues that come up as common matters, which will come up in all the volumes, which you'll see. I think this issue about revivalism is one of those germane ones, or what is the need for the discipline now? That comes up.
Linda has good.
They can't hear.
So I have a question.
Yes.
As you were going through this vast archive of essays, had you found any gaps that Marg hasn't addressed at all, in fact? And I'm sure there have been gaps. So I would be curious to know, what are the gaps that you found, and how does Marg plan to take it on?
Ooh. Let's get to the kill. I mean, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the main motivations. Yeah, Urmi. Thank you. Yes.
I'm very happy to answer this. So we have had huge arguments. Number one was this whole absence of the word caste.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was no mention. Everything was hunky-dory. Everyone was doing everything. Beautiful national representations. I think, it was very, in a classroom, in JNU when we teach, we need to be more cautious than the Marg essays any day. And I think we have been learning how to be cautious. We have learned,
So
relearned.
I think we should qualify this. What I was trying to, I think we should qualify this and explain again the context on why the word caste today and the way in which we want to talk about it is radically more, it's far more explicit in some ways. But when I talk about, when you were locating the conversations, the kind of things that would exemplify caste inclusion, the material was available in the archive to be able to do it, but they were not doing it under the category of caste.
Another
That is
thing-
something I think we should talk about, you know.
Yeah.
So,
So,
exactly.
so another thing was the word power. So there is different formats of power. When one region has all the forms, and then all these forms are fused to become one classical. And then the name is in the, it has traveled from the region to the national space. And the region, you know, goes on struggling with occupational problems. So labor, work, generated by, you know, seasonal performances becomes absent because it has been appropriated within another space. I'm not saying that these are things that were initially or the only guiding force. But the thing is that when we started looking at the essays, like Naman says, all these were there for us to read. And all the patronage essays were fantastic, but they did not talk power. They did not address power. So we were all kind of, you know, very confused about how to do this, but not also assume that those essays are saying this. You see, to refrain from putting words in the absent writer's mouth.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, so
yeah.
hours spent from 11 o'clock in the night till 4 o'clock in the morning. Every night, in angsting about this.
Yeah, I think this is critical. I think the kind of metadata that we associate with material today, and to be able to position and categorize, the categorizing terminology has changed. Now, to be able to say, was the spirit of that not there? That inclusivity, was Marg being deliberately exclusive? It was certainly not. In fact, they were trying to be as inclusive as possible, but they were not using this terminology that we would use today to categorize the same data. Can we have the editorial liberty today to be able to use that terminology and put that metadata down in our terms and therefore retrofit the writings which the author themselves have not written? I mean, what is the writer's integrity then? So this becomes an issue that I think we are struggling with, and we need to be able to see how we will deal with this. This is an issue. But I think, in answer to the question, I think there are gaps in the Marg archive, which are beyond that. Even in the visual arts, I don't think everything was fully covered. I think there were lots of, but I think there has been an effort that every time something is called out, then it becomes necessary for Marg to try and include it. So perhaps the inclusion of studies on women artists from Shantiniketan, just for one example, was left a little too late in the discourse in the entire field. But then the minute it was called out, Marg did respond and started including. And I think some other writers, where Shukla Savant will present ideas where she will also notice similar things, that by when certain issues, how the shifts start taking place. That was the point of the historiographic exercise. And we desperately want the feedback as to be able to know that, you know, what deserves greater acknowledgement. So please look forward to that.
Can I just intervene? Thanks so much for the feedback. I don't think any one of us is taking it as a form of like diminishing the project. No, not at all. Because this is something that we have encountered and we have discussed and engaged with. There's just one thing that I want to say. Caste is missing, power is missing, class is missing. And it is class that is, I suppose, the biggest. I mean, caste would definitely be a part of this, but I'm thinking class also in terms of like the conditions in which and under which an institutional entity such as Marg is produced. The amount of capital resource that goes into the production of Marg, and the classes and castes that actually produce the material that is the Marg material. Now, this is something that any one of us who studies and works within the arts, we just have to look at ourselves and to look at ourselves and think about representation. Practice, study, what is the nature of representation? Who are we? How long are we going to continue to be here? And when will that change? That is definitely
But
an
as you said,
enormous,
Anita,
enormous
that
issue.
was it Urmi or was it you who said that the nature of the practitioners who are pedagogues, who are writing and being documented for the 4 classical dance forms that come up subsequently, come up in a very. You said
I
that.
said this.
that,
I
yeah.
said this. It's a very interesting.
It's a very
moment-
interesting
moment.
shift
Yeah.
that you registered, that you've noticed in the way in which who is speaking for the tradition.
Yeah.
And you've noticed that there are people who are cultural insiders, who are the actual pedagogues and regional performers or what. And then for the first 4, you said that there were the urbane citizens of Delhi, Bombay, who
Yeah.
were commissioned to go and write about these others who are the practitioners. So there is
There is definitely a shift.
a shift that
There is.
in who is speaking for tradition at different points. So there is inclusivity.
See,
and the
I don't
skill-
think this is about Marg alone. This is about the
No,
institutions
we're not
where we
talking.
teach.
Yeah.
The
So
institutions where we practice.
So there is a balance that is coming in. I think we need to keep reminding ourselves about the process by which the writing and the editorial shifts are being registered and the contextualization, as we were saying, of the articles and as more writers come up in the field and how they find. And also this thing about how expensive it is to produce
Yeah,
every one of
absolutely.
these bodies of research. I mean, it's a... And no,
buying
you
not so
can't.
much,
Your
but
buying
production
is 500 rupees a marg,
Yeah.
which is a unit price of 1,300 to produce.
Buying is not the
So
issue.
the buying is not the issue. It's actually the production is quite it requires very serious investment to be able to run the charity like this. I mean, just to be able to have that subvention. Anyway, I think let's.
Yeah, I'll have to call time out now.
Okay, pause for a cup of tea
Thank
and
you all.
come back. There's tea outside, I'm told, but let's carry on with the conversation over tea for those who want to have a discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anita, Urmi, and Naman.
Thank you.
The books are also available outside if you want to grab one, or all of them.